When Eisenhower asked his generals how long it would take to relieve Bastogne, the answers came slowly. 2 weeks, maybe 3. The logistics were impossible. Then Patton spoke. 48 hours, he said calmly. Eisenhower stared at him. The room went silent. Everyone thought Patton had finally gone insane. But Patton had already started planning 3 days before anyone asked him. December 19th, 1944, Supreme Headquarters, Allied Expeditionary Force, Verdun, France. General Dwight D. Eisenhower sat at the head of a long conference table, surrounded by the most powerful military minds in the Western world. The room was thick with cigarette smoke and tension. 3 days earlier, the Germans had launched a massive surprise offensive through the Ardennes forest. American forces were reeling. Entire divisions had been surrounded or destroyed. The town of Bastogne, a critical crossroads in Belgium, was now encircled by German forces. 10,000 American soldiers trapped inside, freezing, running out of ammunition, running out of hope. Eisenhower looked around the table at his generals. Their faces were grim. He asked the question that would define the battle. How long to relieve Bastogne? The answers came slowly, reluctantly. General Bradley said 2 weeks minimum. Others said 3. The logistics were impossible. Roads were icy. German forces controlled the territory between Allied lines and Bastogne. Moving an army through that chaos would take time they did not have. Then George S. Patton spoke. 48 hours, he said calmly, without hesitation. The room went completely silent. Eisenhower stared at Patton. Every other officer in the room turned to look at the Third Army commander. Some thought they had misheard. Others thought Patton had finally lost his mind. 48 hours was not just ambitious. It was impossible by every known principle of military logistics. Patton's Third Army was currently engaged in heavy combat facing south, fighting German forces near the Saar region. To relieve Bastogne, he would need to disengage from combat, turn his entire army 90 degrees, move over 100 miles north through freezing winter conditions on icy roads already clogged with refugees and retreating soldiers, and then attack fortified German positions, all in 2 days. Generals did not do such things. Armies did not move that way. The laws of logistics did not permit it. Eisenhower asked Patton if he was serious. Patton nodded. Completely serious, he replied. I've already started planning. It was true. While other generals had been reacting to the German offensive, Patton had been anticipating it. 3 days before this meeting, before the scope of the disaster was even clear, Patton had ordered his staff to prepare contingency plans for exactly this scenario. Patton had sensed something was wrong in the Ardennes sector for weeks. Intelligence reports showed unusual German activity, troop movements that did not fit, normal defensive patterns, radio traffic that suggested preparation rather than reaction. Other commanders dismissed these signs. The Ardennes was considered a quiet sector, unsuitable for major offensive operations. The terrain was too difficult, the roads too narrow. No sane commander would attack there. But Patton understood something about warfare that others often forgot. The best place to attack was precisely where your enemy believed you would not. On December 12th, a full 4 days before the German offensive began, Patton called his staff together. He told them to prepare 3 different plans for turning Third Army north. Plan A would move 1 division. Plan B would move 2 divisions. Plan C would move the entire army. His staff thought he was being paranoid. They prepared the plans anyway. When the German offensive exploded across the Ardennes on December 16th, Patton was the only Allied commander who was not surprised. He had been expecting something like this, and he was ready. Now, sitting in the conference room at Verdun, Patton explained his plan. Third Army would disengage from its current operations beginning immediately. 3 divisions would turn north that night. The 4th Armored Division would lead the attack toward Bastogne. The 80th Infantry Division and the 26th Infantry Division would follow and protect the flanks. They would attack on December 22nd. exactly 48 hours from now. Eisenhower listened carefully. He was skeptical, but desperate. The situation at Bastogne was deteriorating by the hour. The surrounded American forces were running out of everything: food, ammunition, medical supplies. If relief did not arrive soon, they would be forced to surrender or be annihilated. Eisenhower made his decision. He approved Patton's plan, but he warned Patton that failure was not an option. If Third Army got stuck on the roads, if the attack stalled, if Patton's gamble failed, it could mean the loss of Bastogne and possibly the entire battle. Patton stood up from the table. He looked at Eisenhower with absolute confidence. "We'll be there," he said. Then he walked out to make the impossible happen. The next 48 hours would become legendary in military history. Patton drove back to Third Army headquarters and began issuing orders with furious intensity. Division commanders received their instructions by radio and telephone. Turn north. Move now. Do not wait for perfect conditions. Do not wait for complete supplies. Move. The challenges were staggering. An army is not a single unit that can simply change direction. It is a vast, complex organism of men, vehicles, supplies, fuel, ammunition, medical equipment, communication lines, and command structures. Third Army consisted of over 100,000 soldiers, thousands of tanks and armored vehicles, tens of thousands of trucks and support vehicles. All of this had to be reorganized, redirected, and moved through some of the worst winter weather Europe had seen in decades. Roads were covered in ice. Temperatures dropped below zero. Snow fell constantly. Vehicles skidded off roads and blocked traffic. Fuel froze in tanks. Soldiers suffered frostbite within minutes of exposure. And through all of this, Patton demanded speed. Faster. Move faster. Bastogne cannot wait. Patton understood that the key to this maneuver was not just planning but leadership. He could not command this movement from a comfortable headquarters, miles behind the lines. He had to be there, on the roads, with his men, showing them that the impossible was possible. He climbed into his Jeep and drove north, directly into the chaos of the movement. When traffic jammed at crossroads, Patton personally directed vehicles, waving trucks forward, shouting at drivers to keep moving. When officers reported delays, Patton appeared at their positions within hours, demanding explanations and solutions. His presence was electric. Soldiers who saw their commanding general standing in the freezing wind, urging them forward, found new reserves of energy. If the old man could take it, so could they. Patton's reputation for toughness was legendary, but this went beyond reputation. He was asking his men to do something unprecedented, and he was doing it alongside them. Not from safety, not from comfort, from the same frozen roads, the same bitter wind, the same impossible conditions. Meanwhile, inside Bastogne, the situation grew more desperate by the hour. The surrounded American forces, primarily the 101st Airborne Division and elements of other units, were holding on through sheer determination. They were outnumbered, outgunned, and running out of everything. German forces had completely encircled the town. No supplies could get through. No reinforcements could arrive. The wounded lay in makeshift hospitals without adequate medicine or equipment. Soldiers rationed their remaining ammunition, knowing that each bullet had to count. On December 22nd, the same day Patton had promised to attack, German commanders sent a formal demand for surrender to the American forces in Bastogne. The message promised fair treatment for prisoners if the Americans laid down their weapons. The American commander, Brigadier General Anthony McAuliffe, read the surrender demand. His response became one of the most famous moments of the entire war. He sent back a single word: nuts. The Germans were confused by the American slang. They asked what it meant. The American officer who delivered the response explained. It means, go to hell. Patton received word of McAuliffe's defiant response and grinned. That was exactly the kind of fighting spirit he admired. But spirit alone would not save Bastogne. The men inside needed relief, and they needed it now. Patton pushed his forces even harder. The 4th Armored Division, leading the attack, encountered fierce German resistance as they approached the Bastogne perimeter. The Germans knew relief was coming. They had positioned forces to block every possible approach. Each village became a battle. Each crossroad became a fight. Tank crews fought in brutal close-quarters combat, sometimes firing at point-blank range. Infantry soldiers advanced through waist-deep snow, taking casualties with every yard gained. Progress was measured in hundreds of yards, not miles. But they kept moving forward. Patton visited the front lines constantly, encouraging his men, demanding more. He knew that every hour of delay meant more suffering for the trapped soldiers in Bastogne. He knew that some of his men would die in this desperate push. But he also knew that stopping now would mean the death of everyone inside that surrounded town. On December 26th, 4 days after Patton's promise at Verdun, the first elements of 4th Armored Division broke through the German encirclement and entered Bastogne. The relief column was led by tanks from the 37th Tank Battalion, commanded by Lieutenant Colonel Creighton Abrams. When the American tanks rolled into the town, the reaction from the defenders was overwhelming. Men who had held on for days against impossible odds, who had refused to surrender despite having every reason to give up, finally allowed themselves to feel hope. Soldiers embraced. Some wept openly. They had been told that help was coming, but many had doubted it would arrive in time. Now American tanks were rolling through their streets, bringing ammunition, bringing food, bringing the promise that they would not die forgotten in this frozen Belgian town. Patton had not made his 48-hour deadline exactly. The breakthrough came on day 4, not day 2, but he had accomplished something that every other general believed was impossible. He had turned an entire army and attacked in less than a week. The strategic impact of Patton's maneuver extended far beyond the relief of one town. The German offensive in the Ardennes, which Hitler had hoped would split the Allied forces and force a negotiated peace, was now doomed. Bastogne was the critical crossroads that controlled the road network in the region. As long as American forces held it, German supply lines were disrupted, and their advance was constrained. By relieving Bastogne and then counterattacking, Patton helped transform a defensive crisis into an offensive opportunity. Within weeks, the Germans were pushed back beyond their starting positions. The Battle of the Bulge, which had begun as Germany's last desperate gamble for victory, ended as their final defeat in the West. After this battle, German forces would never launch another major offensive. They would only retreat, defend, and ultimately surrender. Military historians would later analyze Patton's Bastogne maneuver in detail, trying to understand how he accomplished what seemed logistically impossible. The answers were complex: superior planning, aggressive leadership, soldiers willing to push beyond normal human limits. But perhaps the simplest answer was Patton himself. Patton believed in the impossible. He did not accept limitations that other commanders took for granted. When his staff told him something could not be done, he demanded they find a way. When logistics officers said an army could not move that fast, he proved them wrong. When other generals calculated timelines based on standard procedures, Patton threw away the standards and created new ones. This mindset was not reckless. Patton prepared meticulously. His contingency planning before the German offensive demonstrated that he thought ahead, anticipated problems, and prepared solutions before they were needed. But his preparation served aggression, not caution. He prepared so that when opportunity appeared, he could strike immediately without hesitation. At Bastogne, opportunity appeared in the form of desperate necessity. 10,000 American soldiers needed rescue. Patton's preparation allowed him to respond faster than anyone believed possible. The Germans never recovered from the shock. Their intelligence had told them Third Army was engaged far to the south. They had calculated that any relief attempt would take weeks. They had not calculated on Patton. German commanders later expressed their disbelief at what Patton had accomplished. Field Marshal Gerd von Rundstedt, the senior German commander on the Western Front, reportedly said that Patton's movement was the most astonishing achievement of the entire war. Other German officers interviewed after the war consistently named Patton as the Allied general they feared most, not because he had the most troops or the best equipment, but because he was unpredictable. He appeared where he should not be. He moved faster than should be possible. He attacked when defense seemed the only option. Fighting Patton, one German general explained, was like fighting a force of nature. You could not predict what he would do, only react to what he had already done. At Bastogne, the Germans reacted too slowly. By the time they understood that Patton was coming north with his entire army, he was already breaking through their lines. Their defensive positions, hastily established to maintain the siege, crumbled under the assault of forces that should not have been there yet. Inside Third Army, the Bastogne maneuver became a source of immense pride. Soldiers who had participated in that desperate march north told stories about it for the rest of their lives. They remembered the bitter cold, the exhaustion, the moments when it seemed impossible to continue. They remembered officers urging them forward, promising that Bastogne was counting on them. They remembered seeing Patton himself, standing in his jeep at crossroads, waving them on with that famous scowl on his face. These memories bound them together as veterans of something extraordinary. They had done what other armies could not do. They had moved faster, fought harder, and achieved more than military doctrine said was possible. Patton told them afterward that he was proud of them, that what they had accomplished would be studied in military academies for generations, that they had proven what American soldiers could do when properly led. The men of Third Army had always respected Patton. After Bastogne, that respect deepened into something approaching reverence. But the Bastogne relief was not without cost. The desperate push north, the battles through German resistance, the assault to break the encirclement, all of this came at a terrible price. Hundreds of Third Army soldiers died in those December days. Hundreds more were wounded or suffered severe frostbite. Tank crews burned to death in their vehicles when German shells found their mark. Infantry soldiers fell in the snow and never rose again. Patton knew this. He visited hospitals when he could, speaking with wounded soldiers, thanking them for their sacrifice. He wrote personal letters to the families of officers killed in the offensive. He understood that his aggressive tactics, his demand for speed at all costs, meant that some of his men would die, who might have lived under a more cautious commander. This was the burden of command that Patton carried. He believed that aggressive action saved lives in the long run by ending battles quickly, by keeping the enemy off balance, by winning wars faster. But he never pretended that his methods were without cost. Eisenhower's assessment of Patton evolved significantly after Bastogne. Before the battle, Eisenhower had viewed Patton as a valuable but troublesome subordinate, brilliant in attack but difficult to manage, prone to insubordination, capable of embarrassing incidents like the slapping affair in Sicily. After Bastogne, Eisenhower understood that Patton's difficult personality was inseparable from his military genius. The same aggressive confidence that made Patton hard to control also made him capable of achievements no other commander could match. Eisenhower wrote in his memoirs that Patton's relief of Bastogne was one of the most brilliant performances by any commander on either side during the war. He acknowledged that when he first heard Patton's 48-hour promise, he thought it was impossible. That Patton proved him wrong demonstrated the value of having commanders who refused to accept conventional limitations. Eisenhower never fully liked Patton. Their personalities were too different. But after Bastogne, Eisenhower trusted Patton completely for offensive operations. The Battle of the Bulge continued through January 1945, but its outcome was decided in those critical December days. German forces, having failed to capture Bastogne and its vital crossroads, found their offensive stalling. Without the road network that Bastogne controlled, they could not supply their forward units effectively. American and Allied forces counterattacked along the entire front, pushing the Germans back step by step. By the end of January, the bulge in the Allied lines had been eliminated. German losses were catastrophic. They had committed their last strategic reserves to this offensive, and those reserves were now destroyed. Tanks that could not be replaced. Veteran soldiers who could not be retrained. Fuel that was already desperately scarce. The Battle of the Bulge marked the effective end of Germany's ability to conduct offensive operations in the West. From this point forward, they could only defend and retreat. The war would continue for several more months, but its outcome was no longer in doubt. Patton did not rest after Bastogne. He immediately began planning the next offensive, pushing his staff to prepare for operations across the Rhine and into Germany itself. His energy seemed inexhaustible, his appetite for attack undiminished. Other commanders might have paused to consolidate gains, to rest exhausted troops, to rebuild depleted supplies. Patton kept moving. He understood that momentum in warfare was precious. Once you had the enemy retreating, you did not give them time to recover. You pursued relentlessly until they collapsed completely. This philosophy drove Third Army's operations through the final months of the war. They advanced across Germany at speeds that continued to astonish observers. They captured more enemy prisoners than any other Allied army. They liberated concentration camps and saw firsthand the horrors that made their fight meaningful. And through it all, Patton led from the front, demanding more, always more, until the final German surrender in May 1945. When historians assess Patton's career, the Bastogne relief consistently ranks as his finest achievement. Other operations showcased his tactical brilliance. Sicily demonstrated his speed. The breakout from Normandy displayed his ability to exploit opportunities. The race across France showed his logistical creativity. But Bastogne combined all of these qualities in a single desperate week that saved an army and changed a battle. At Bastogne, Patton demonstrated that the impossible was possible for those who refused to accept limits. He showed that preparation and aggression, combined properly, could achieve results beyond conventional calculation. He proved that leadership, personal and visible leadership from the front, could inspire soldiers to exceed their own expectations. And he reminded the world that in warfare, as in life, those who dare greatly sometimes achieve greatly. The men he saved at Bastogne, the soldiers of the 101st Airborne and the other surrounded units, never forgot what Third Army did for them that December. Patton died less than a year after the war ended, in a car accident in Germany in December 1945. He never wrote his complete memoirs. He never had the chance to fully explain his methods and philosophy to future generations. But his actions spoke clearly enough. At Verdun, when asked the impossible, he promised to deliver. At Bastogne, he kept that promise. The military academies still teach his Bastogne maneuver. Officers still study how he prepared contingency plans before they were needed, how he moved an army faster than doctrine allowed, how he led from the front during the most demanding operation, how he kept pushing even when progress seemed impossible. These lessons endure because they capture something timeless about warfare and leadership. Technology changes, tactics evolve, but the fundamental truth remains. There are moments in battle when everything depends on one commander's willingness to attempt the impossible. At Bastogne, that commander was George S. Patton. 48 hours. That was the promise. 100,000 men, 90 degrees, freezing roads and German resistance, and the lives of 10,000 trapped American soldiers hanging in the balance. Every reasonable calculation said it could not be done. Every experienced officer in that room at Verdun believed Patton was dreaming. But Patton had already started planning. He had seen what others missed. He had prepared while others reacted. And when the moment came, he delivered. Not perfectly, not exactly on schedule, but close enough to save Bastogne, close enough to turn the battle, close enough to prove that in war, the difference between possible and impossible often comes down to one person who refuses to accept the difference. Eisenhower had asked his generals how long it would take. Patton answered 48 hours. The room went silent because everyone knew it was impossible. But Patton made them believe, and then he made it true. Patton promised the impossible and delivered. 48 hours to turn an army. 4 days to break a siege. One commander who refused to accept that something could not be done. But here's the question for you. Was Patton a genius who saw what others couldn't? Or was he reckless, gambling with thousands of lives on a plan that could have failed? What do you think made him different from every other general in that room? Drop your answer in the comments. And if this story moved you, subscribe to Frontline Legends. More untold stories are coming. History is waiting.